Hello, this is James Barkell.
And it is wonderful to have your company here on the centre court.
You are listening to the Coach Doctor podcast.
Strikes it beautifully and it's down the middle.
In this podcast series, we discuss all things coaching and sports science.
Beats one, beats a couple, still going.
Each episode will feature prominent coaches on the front line of their sport.
Across to Mbappe.
As well as some of the world's leading university academics who research what it takes to get the W.
All Blacks under big pressure again.
If there is an aspect of your coaching that needs some assistance, you can always count on the Coach Doctor to add life to your program.
Browning's having a terrific run. The first three to qualify. You betcha!
Before I start this episode, I just want to let all the coaches and athletes out there know about a special deal that we've got going with Elite Performance Journals. Elite Performance Journals make both coaches' notepads ideal for developing session plans and for reviewing or reflecting on sessions. And for athletes looking for that extra edge, they also have an athlete journal designed around the specific needs of up-and-coming professional athletes. For any listeners of the Coach Doctor podcast, you can receive 20% off any of their products by simply going to eliteperformancejournal.com, check out all of their products, and when you check out, use the code COACHDOCTOR, all one word and lowercase, for a special 20% discount. For schools and clubs, you can also get journals specific to your group's needs with things like team values and the team's logos. Okay, now on to the episode. In this episode, I speak with one of the masters of sports development and coach research, Professor Jean Côté. Professor Côté is a member of the School of Kinesiology and Health Studies at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. His research interests are in the areas of children in sport, coaching, positive youth development, and sports expertise. Professor Côté has published more than 130 research articles on a variety of sports psychology and coaching topics, as well as publishing 50 book chapters. His work is among the most widely cited in academic sports literature. He has delivered over 50 keynote addresses at major national and international conferences, well over 100 invited presentations, and almost 300 conference presentations. So to have him on this podcast was an absolute pleasure. Throughout the podcast, we discussed some areas of his research that applied specifically to coaching, and these included the role of deliberate play versus deliberate practice, why sampling and diversification in sport may be necessary in the developmental years, the role of parents in sport, transformational coaching, and Professor Côté's very own development model of sports participation. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Jean, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate giving up your time to join us on the podcast today.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Are you happy to get started?
Yes, all good to go. Yep.
Okay. The first question I'd like to ask you is, where are you currently and what are you up to?
Yeah, well, I just came back from Australia from a trip in Australia where we did a bit of a tour, speaking to a lot of different sport organizations. But currently I'm on a sabbatical, which allow me to that trip, that was about 3 weeks. And it all started with a conference in Rowing Australia that invited me to speak at the Gold Coast at their annual conference. And then from there, I just linked with a lot of different sport. And so that was wonderful to be there and wonderful to be back, because the last time I was there, well, for a long period of time was 2002, 2003. So it was a great trip. But yeah, so this is part of a sabbatical. I have a 6-month sabbatical, which is basically, in Canada, the sabbaticals, you get those every 7 years. And your relief of your teaching, you don't have to teach, but you have to keep up the research and keep writing, keep publishing papers, giving talks. And so this trip to Australia was part of, again, the knowledge translation and kind of some research that we keep doing with colleagues there. So I'm now back in California. So that's where we were based for the 6 months. And in about 3 weeks, I'm going back to Canada to my university at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And I teach in the fall again for a semester. So I'm going to teach 2 courses and then back on sabbatical for another 6 months in January 2023. So instead of taking a full year, I took 2 6 months.
Okay.
So yeah.
And when you say you're based in California now, what's the project happening in California?
Not too much, happening here. The big reason is my wife is from California,
Okay.
so we're visiting her family, and it's nicer to spend the summer in the winter in California than it is in Canada. So that was part of the reason why we're here. And then I have called like Wade Gilbert. I haven't had a chance to see Wade, but Wade is not far from here. About 3 hours away, so I've been connecting with him a bit.
Yep.
And so a lot of the time is spent a lot on Zoom, talking to my students, writing, and starting some new research project.
Okay. Oh, great. So in the academic world, you're probably one of the first names that comes to mind when someone mentions sports development, participation, and coaching. How did you end up as a professor researching sports development? What's your background there?
I think I've always been interested. My background is really in sports psychology, and I did my doctorate with John Sanmela, who passed. But John was very influential in my career, and I think I've just came across. I think in my pathway, there's a lot of people that I've met throughout my career that were very influential. And so at the beginning of my career, like John, my advisor, was doing a lot of work on expertise, development of expertise. And John Sanmela was a very good friend with Bruce Abernethy at the University of Queensland. And then Bruce had this project in Australia with national teams where we kind of trace back the success and what made elite level players in Australia. So a lot of the research, a lot of my work kind of really started there with working with Bruce on these projects and trying to understand what are the elements of achieving high level of performance in sport. So we published a lot of papers, and throughout the years, I think there was a bit of a shift in my career, about maybe 12, 15 years ago, where there was not as much money or funding into elite sport. But I really looked at sport, and there's a lot of work that has been done in developmental psychology on positive youth development, and really looking at sport as an activity that is ideal for personal development, for people to develop as good citizen and as contributing to society. Or so really I mesh those two things together and say, okay, well, sport, even elite sport, it could be done in an environment, in a climate where you become good people and you also achieve high level of performance. And that's kind of really what triggered my interest all along, and what has maintained my program of research, trying to understand the kind of not the conflict, but the different way that one can achieve elite level of performance, but also really stay motivated and stay a good contributor to society also, if they don't achieve elite performance.
Okay. No, that's really interesting. So one of the things you talk about in a lot of your research is deliberate practice and deliberate play. Can you first of all explain what the difference is and why deliberate play might be more important in some instances?
Yeah, definitely. So I think deliberate practice probably does not need a long introduction, but Anders Ericsson in 1993 was a psychology professor at the University of Florida, and Anders passed 2 years ago also. But he came up with a paper on musicians, and identifying this type of practice with elite level musicians that differentiated the elite level musician from less elite. And that type of practice was not enjoyable, required a lot of effort, and was made to improve performance and required some feedback from coaches or instructors or adults. And I think this has led to a lot of research on expertise. And I think it has opened a lot of avenues to really understand what the type of practice that lead to elite performance. So and he labeled that deliberate practice, and they labeled, the group labeled that deliberate practice. But what we noticed in our studies in Australia of elite level athletes is that it was not only about deliberate practice. a lot of the elite level athletes that achieve high level of performance in sport, they played a lot when they were kids, just for fun, just going in a park and having fun and just playing, kicking the ball or shooting basketball in the driveway or playing soccer in a park or just going swimming for fun and just fooling around with things and moving. So and this is where the idea of deliberate play came up. Like the kids did not do that to improve their performance, but they still learned the skill and they still develop some skills. So when you look at deliberate practice and deliberate play, you have kind of two opposite ends of activities that kids can engage in. And one is very enjoyable, that's deliberate play, and one is less enjoyable, that's deliberate practice. And one is done for skill acquisition, that's deliberate practice, while the other one is done for enjoyment or social or just to meet or to be with friends. And I think what we've been able to show through the research is that deliberate play is a big contributor to motivation and interest and maintaining engagement in sport. And if it's only about deliberate practice, which basically what Erickson and colleagues suggested, there's a lot of consequences for that type of involvement at an earlier age, and negative consequences like burnout, dropout, and injuries. So that's kind of the difference between deliberate practice and deliberate play.
So if there's a coach that's listening at the moment, either a developmental coach or even a coach of adults, what's the right combination of deliberate play and deliberate practice in a training session?
Well, I think one of the things that we really in the last few years that we came to the realization that I think it's very difficult to put an age on these things and to say, this is when you should start deliberate practice. So yeah. For certain, if you want to become better at something, you need to be involved in deliberate practice. You need to learn the skill and you need to be engaged and put a lot of effort into acquiring the skills that would allow you to perform at a high level. But before you start to get involved in those type of activity, you should have had some fun through play. Mm-hmm. So basically what we're trying to say and what we want to say is that you should play before you practice, and you should do a lot of different sport before you specialize in one.
Yeah.
So then I think if you follow this, then the kids are kind of ready at different age. But if you trigger that interest, that fun, that really intrinsic motivation of doing something through play, then the kids will want to practice. They will want to become better, mm-hmm. and they will be the one that request deliberate practice. I think the problem is when adults are coming into kids' sports and they say, this is what you have to do to become better. This is not how you kick the ball. This is how you should be kicking the ball. And they don't let them really experiencing different types of ways of doing things. So if you really push me and, if I had to put an age, I would say that children under the age of 13, they should play. There should be more play than practice. And they should, every session should be really designed around enjoyment, fun, challenges, and not necessarily deliberate practice. This is what you have to acquire and the types of skill you should be doing. Yeah. And after 13, usually the kids are able to make their decisions about their engagement and how much effort they want to put in. So that's where there's a bit of a shift from play to practice and more deliberate practice as they get older.
Do you find that there has been a shift in actual coaches providing more play, or do you think personally for me, if I go and watch young kids sport or training sessions, I see a lot of lining up behind cones doing, practicing their dribbling one at a time while the others wait. And I see a lot of that stuff still. Yep. Do you think that there is starting to become a shift into more play?
It's a great question because, we do this, we have research to show the importance of play. I give a lot of talks, I talk to a lot of organizations, and then you're right that, there's a big movement in a lot of countries about early specialization, more practice at an earlier age. And then people use example like Tiger Woods and, people that, very anecdotal kind of evidence that shows this pathway. and it's very hard to refute that, because it's very hard to say that if you want to be a very good tennis player, why should you play basketball, or why should you play instead of practicing? What the whole idea here is that people forget that kids are kids, and they have different needs, and the need to play is very important. The need to enjoy and to be with your peers and having fun. So I think we need to shift a little bit sport. It becomes very adult led, with adult thinking that this is what kids need at a certain age. But we really need to provide an environment that will allow the kids to experience and to be creative and to try different things, and to try different way of doing one thing. So I guess I'm not really answering your question. It is. You're right to say that there's still a lot of work to do, but I think I'm optimistic, because there's a lot of organizations that are really taking this, and taking those principles and putting them in their player development models. And I think we were just talking before about rugby league in Australia. They have an athlete development model that really include those principles of play and of diversification between sport, and of the importance of coaches that care about the person before the athletes. And so all these principles are there. And I think it's just going to take time before it really gets into the youth sport system.
Yeah. Okay. No, that sounds great. And another big part of your research, and you mentioned it earlier on, was specialization. Just for our listeners, if there's someone who's not too sure what specialization is, can you explain what you mean by specialization, either early or late specialization?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I think people are trying to define what it is. We're talking about it a lot, and there's not a lot of definitions. Recently, there's a paper that just came out in Medicine where they kind of suggest different criteria for early specialization. But I think in a brief, it's engagement in one sport over a period of over several months, like 8 months of the year. So there's not a lot of opportunity to do other sport during the year, and at a very high level of intensity. So a number of hours that is will be more than one practice and one game. So it could be like 6, 7 to 10 hours a week at a very young age. So that would be kind of the definition of what early specialization is. You are involved in one sport, you're not doing other sport, you're involved for the majority of the year in that sport, and you're putting a lot of intensity. And what it does is it doesn't give kids a lot of time to do other sport or to try different types of activities. That's basically what they do. They go to school and then they do that sport. So that would be early specialization, kind of in a nutshell.
Again, with your research, you've identified that, I guess, diversification or sampling other sports can be quite a good thing for young children. You've started to touch on that. Why is it so important that sampling or diversification in trying other sports and not specializing at a very young age, tends to be better for development?
Yeah, well, so when we talked, like in our original research, we talked about sampling as the term that include diversification between sport and diversification within sport.
Yep.
So sampling. So if you take this, so there's two things. So diversification between sport, which means that kids at a young age, they should try different sport. And the reason they should try different sport is that when you think about your life and you're thinking about anything you're interested in, like anything you do, everybody, that's on this, that is listening to this, think about an activity in your life that you're doing that you like, a hobby or something. You play tennis, or you listen to classical music, or you watch horror movies, so how was that trigger? It was triggered by trying different things. If you like jazz music or rock music, it's because you listen to different types of music and you said, this is what I like. And I think the same principle applied to sport. You can be very lucky and just listen to one kind of music and really love it, but you don't really know what else is out there. So I think it's important from an interest perspective to trigger interest in kids, to give them opportunity to try different sport, try different things, because they're not the same. Playing tennis and playing rugby is not the same thing. You have very different peer group, different types of environment, different coaches. So allowing athletes or young people to try different things will allow them to pick something by themselves. So that's the big, very important thing about diversity between sport. So diversity within sport is the whole idea that maybe you can do one sport, but do a lot of different activities within that sport. So the best example, I spent some time in Brazil, about 3 months, and they play soccer a lot. They play soccer but they play soccer in a lot of different types of environments. So they play soccer on the beach. They play soccer in a tennis court. They play soccer on a field. They play in a gymnasium, and they play organized soccer. But all these different environments are kind of different sport, basically. They're different peer group. Sometimes there's coaches, sometimes there's no coaches. So that's the idea of diversity within a sport. And I think that's a very important concept to keep it for young people. And in addition to that, within the sport, allowing kids to play different positions, if it's a team sport, for example, or play different roles within a sport. So really getting, like in ice hockey, very often we say, we tell a 6-year-old they're going to be a goaltender, and then they're a goaltender for the rest of their life. But they should play defense and offense and try different positions.
Yeah.
And then see where, what they like and where they fit the best.
Yeah. So you just gave an example of the Brazilian soccer situation where they're playing on the beach, the tennis courts and gyms and on the fields, and that would probably be a really good example of deliberate play, wouldn't it? Because they're such a strong nation in football, but you don't see them doing a lot of organised, deliberate practice. Whenever you see vision of Brazilians doing football, it's always game-based, isn't it? It's always they're playing.
Very much, yeah, right on. I think it's such an important thing, and it's enjoyable. It's challenging. They challenge themselves, and they learn the skill that way.
Going back to specialization, so a lot of people might argue that Tiger Woods started specializing in golf at a very young age, and you mentioned Tiger before. Is Tiger an outlier, or is there still room for this early specialization in some sort of sports?
So I think what we tend to do, when we look at those elite, I think it's very easy to pick Tiger Woods, but we could also pick Roger Federer.
Yeah,
that is a complete different background, and then you can make a case that Roger Federer, came through a sampling environment, and Tiger Woods through an early spirit, and it's true, in some ways. So I think that's the difference between research and anecdotal evidence, and I think what the Tiger Woods story gives us is a survivor effect. It's basically what we need to do in research. We need to be able to have two groups: the groups that make it to the top, but also a group that does not make it. And making sure that we see differences between those two groups. Like Tiger Woods, how many people played golf and did what Tiger Woods did as a kid and never made it? I bet there's many of them.
Yeah.
So they got injured.
Yeah, we don't hear about all the ones that don't make it. We only hear about the one or two that do make it.
Exactly. And then we make this recipe of this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
And then it does not give us the full picture.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a false economy in terms of, this is what Tiger did. We need to follow that exact, recipe. Then often, you have the issues with burnout, and a child taking up a sport at that age, they don't even know if they enjoy that sport yet. And as you said, they're children, and it could be a big problem. And it might be just the parent driving that motivation.
Exactly. Yeah. And the way I like to talk about early specialization is I like to talk about it in terms of risk factor. So basically, at a population level, there's more risk for burnout, dropout, injuries if you specialize early. But that's at the population level. The Tiger Woods could happen. And you could have individual cases that makes it with early specialization. It's the same thing. I was just in Australia swimming in the ocean, they told me not to go swimming at when the sun set, because there maybe there's some sharks. So that's gonna, they come, but you can still go swimming and you're not going to be eaten by a shark, but there's more risk.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole thing here. I think, like people think, oh, look, it works for this person. Sure, it works for this person, but apply it to a big system with a lot of people, you get more risk of negative consequences.
Yeah. No, you've explained that really, really well. So thanks for that. Jean, at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned you'd been in Australia doing some presentations on transformational coaching. Can you explain what transformational coaching is and why it's important?
Yeah. So this is kind of the last, kind of some of the work we've been doing for the last 10 years or so. And it was really trying to understand the interpersonal behaviors of coaches, so of coaching. And with Wade Gilbert in 2009, we wrote a paper providing a definition of what coaching effectiveness is. And in that paper, we suggested, and I think it's been holding quite well, that coaches have professional behaviors, interpersonal and intrapersonal. So professional behaviors of coaches is everything related to your sport. So if it's rugby, it would be, the strategy in rugby, offensive strategy, defensive strategy, everything, even the mental game, everything that's around the performance of the sport. Then the interpersonal is the idea of communication, of engagement, of leadership. So how does the coach really transmit information and receive information? How do they interact with their athletes? How do they create relationships? So that's the enter. And then the intrapersonal is the ability for coaches to reflect and really to think about what they did wrong or and improve from reflection. And what we've noticed is that coaching courses around the world, and we did some reviews of those courses, is most of the courses on coaching are about professional behaviors. So if you want to be a tennis coach, you're going to learn about tennis, or a basketball coach, you're going to learn about basketball. And really you get to those clinics, those coaching workshops, and it's all about the sport, which is very important. I'm not saying it's not. It's a foundation of coaching. It's a very important aspect of coaching. But that, we did some observation studies, that is not what differentiates a good coach from a very elite coach and a very good coach that would be influential. And what are those behaviors that makes a difference between a good coach and an excellent coach? It's interpersonal behaviors. So it's how coaches relate to their athletes. And the whole area here, I think, that is problematic when we talk about interpersonal behaviors is that coaches acknowledge that it's important, but they don't really know what they're talking about. So you're a rugby coach, so you know about rugby, so you can get together with your mate and talk about rugby tactic and strategy, because you have a vocabulary that allows you to do that. Mm-hmm. But now you say interpersonal relationships are also very important. But then, whoops, we don't have words to talk about these things. We don't have vocabulary to talk about these things. So what transformational coaching is about, it's using transformational leadership theory that has been used in a lot of leadership research in sport, medicine, education, and taking those principles and apply them to sport coaching. So basically what we have is the 4I of transformational leadership. And we did studies in sport, observation studies, and we have 11 behaviors that really reflect the effectiveness of interpersonal relationship in coaching. And those behaviors, we've been able to show through studies that they make a difference in terms of outcomes, in terms of performance, engagement, and also personal development of players. So that's what transformational coaching is about. It's a little bit abstract right now.
Yeah.
But we have a workshop, a 4-hour workshop that I did with a lot of organization in Australia when I was there, that basically get coaches to think about those behaviors. And I'll mention one of those 11 behaviors is we ask coaches to show vulnerability and humility. So by doing this, what you're doing is, you apologize after you make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
It creates an environment of trust. But those are the kinds of behaviors, emphasizing the learning process instead of outcomes, recognizing individual interests. Kids that are different, kids that have different needs, that have different types of maybe their different family style, or they have obstacle in their life, recognizing that as a coach. So they're all behaviors. There's 11 behaviors that really focus on establishing those personal relationships.
Okay, and you talked about doing some, being involved with some sporting organisations in Australia around their coach education. Are you seeing some of these more intrapersonal characteristics being developed in coaching programs, or is it still all about the X's and O's and the technical aspects of the sport?
No, I think it's very exciting to present this work and to talk to organization about it, because I was with Golf Australia, Swimming Australia, Tennis Australia, Rugby League, and in all the workshops and those presentations, like, coaches realize that suddenly, I do these things. I'm good at, because a lot of those coaches that we talked to, they were very good coaches, but I think what it does is that it allows them suddenly to have that vocabulary to talk about these things, and it just reinforces those behaviors. Asking an athletes when they come to practice, asking them about how was school today. That's individualized consideration. That's a very important aspect of, recognizing that they have something outside of sport.
Yeah.
And getting them to know them outside of sport. It goes a long way. So again, it's not that complicated, and a lot of coaches already do these things. So what it allows coaches to do, I think, through it is provide words on those effective behaviors, on those behaviors that we know are effective.
Yeah. And even an awareness of it, like just being aware of making sure that they're doing some of those things, as well as it's just, again, another way of, I guess, preparing and developing that skill as a coach. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, the intrapersonal, like when we talk about those behaviors, there's a lot of discussion between the coaches in terms of what they do and what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it opens really that intrapersonal, that reflection piece also, that is very important.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really interesting. And another area of your research that I understand you've been doing a bit of lately is parental involvement in sports. What are some of the key findings in this area?
Yeah. So, well, we're just starting this work, and I did some work earlier on in my career on parents. I think the main things that that's important is that there's a lot of work on parents that tell the parents what to do, to support their kids. But I think a lot of the things, and sometimes parents are blamed all the time in sport. They're kind of working against the coach, and so really what we're trying to do is really create an environment where parents are partners, and they're part of the sport experience, and they could be big contributor. And sometimes they don't really know what to do and how to act. So I think a lot of the things that we're trying to do and trying to research is really understand those ideal type of environment where parents are supporting but not pushing. So just enough to challenging, but very often it's not through very concrete support, but it's by being a role model, by asking the right questions, and sometimes by asking no questions, just let the kids figure things out a little bit. So I think, to me, a parent as a partner of the sport experience become something that we want to really try to understand a lot more, because parents are paying a lot of money to get their kids involved in sport. We're looking at them a little bit as a consumer of sport. Like they're so they must be expecting something in return. They must be expecting, they're investing a lot. So understanding that types of transaction and what are they getting and how can they contribute is really what we're trying to understand better.
Okay. And I guess one of the other areas, and I think it probably goes back to that idea of early specialization, there's a lot of academies that pop up these days. And you mentioned this briefly, especially in Australia, we get a lot in soccer or football and also other sports as well. But that's one that really springs to mind. Are these sorts of academies where they're doing, a lot of practice and a lot of training, and there's often really high costs involved? Parents, parents are almost, it's like my child's in this academy, they're trying to play each other off because, one child's in the Manchester United Academy and the other child's in the Barcelona Academy.
Yeah.
Are these important? Are these helping sport, or could they potentially be hindering junior sport?
Yeah. Well, I think I certainly don't want to make a generalization here that all academies are bad, but they're built on an adult model of sport. They're built on this idea that deliberate practice, early specialization, the more you practice, the better you're going to be, which I think makes sense to some level, but it could lead to a lot of negative consequences, like we said before. So it's not really, they're not structured around what children needs and want. And but at the same time, I don't think we should reject all that. There's probably a time in young people's life where they would be ready to get in those types of structured, where it's, more practice. And so I guess my big thing here would be to make sure that it doesn't happen too early. And that it's the kid's decision and it's not the adult's decision to go to those academies. Yeah. So it's not the parents and the coaches that decide to say, you go this and that's what you're going to do, but it's the kids that want to do it. And if the decision comes from the kids, there's nothing wrong, like it's fine, and it's probably the right thing.
Yeah. So it's, I guess, maturity level of children as well. Like I've got an 8-year-old son who, he's not interested in going to soccer training at all. It's he just wants to play, run around, doing a range of different things.
Yeah.
Whereas, he's got some friends who are really into it, and they're watching games, and they've got a soccer ball at their feet at every moment they can. And those kids would probably be much more interested in, wanting to go to something like that. And so I guess that maturity level is a big factor as well.
Very much, and I think we just have to be, I think what we should do, what we need to create environments where we provide opportunities to kids. Yeah. And those academies are different types of opportunities, but it's not for everybody, like you just said, and maybe, the kids that don't want to go to those, what other options do we give them? Because it doesn't mean that the kids that are going to the academies, and we know that from the research, it's impossible to identify talent at 13, 14, 15, 16. So in soccer or football or whatever. So we identify very often those kids will be identified, they will get more practice but we need to make sure that the kids that are not in those academies also have opportunities to develop their skill, to enjoy sport for recreational or to pursue a career or elite, more of an elite pathway.
Mm-hmm. One of the other examples that I've heard you discuss is you gave a presentation, I think it was at a swimming conference, and you were talking about, I think, transformational coaching in one room, and when you finished your presentation, you were walking down the hall and you saw this other room that was, packed with everybody in it, and it was, I think from memory, Michael Phelps's coach talking about Michael Phelps's swimming program, and there were all these developmental coaches and parents listening and thinking, this is what we need to do for our child or, our swimmers, because that's what Michael Phelps has done. What's the problem you see in this?
Well, I think that example is very much related to what we were talking about before, is that parents, coaches, they're looking for the quick recipe, the quick fix, or the type of training that would lead to success. And that's what they're after. Okay, well, this is the coach of Michael Phelps. But the problem here is that linking the behaviors of the coach, of what that coach did, a year before the Olympic, to winning a gold medal at the Olympic, that's not right. That's complete. From a research perspective, it's complete baloney. It's complete, because it's doesn't make any sense. Michael Phelps didn't get that in 1 year. He got that in 25 years of training. So I think we have to be very careful about those quick fix, but that's what we're after. I think as human being, we're after this very quick little recipe that would help us to become better. But it's a long process, and it's a process where there should be some enjoyment and there should be some challenge, and we cannot copy these things. There's so many factors in Michael Phelps' success. You just look at his body type and his, the type of things that the ways he swims, and so those are all the factors that affect performance. But again, people want to know what he did or what he did.
No, I guess there's also that idea of that his training program is specific to his physiological requirements and his resting periods, and when you just see the amount of laps he's doing and the times and that information, you're probably not getting the full story either. So it's important that you understand, and like you said, it's those 20 or so years that got him to that level that he was at to win those Olympic medals. That the people aren't sort of considering as well, and that's really important.
And the focus on professional behaviors, of coaches, like what kind of training do I need to have? And sometime, I was in Swimming Australia, and I sat with some coaches, for breakfast, and they were telling me, they listened to my talk on transformational coaching, and they said, this is not what I did in terms of the practice. It's how I interacted, and they will give me fantastic examples of things that they did with their athletes to help them really, to motivate them and to keep them going, and they said that made the difference. It was not necessary. The training has to be there. I'm not saying it's not important. But what makes the difference is not the number of laps, but it's more interaction.
Well, swimming's a really hard one, because you've got, with football and rugby and AFL and ice hockey, you're actually playing a game, so you can create those modified games and those play environments. Whereas swimming, it's hard to coach swimming in a game with a game sets model. It's
but I think they're very creative. I think coaches do a lot of things, and it's not necessarily just about the games, but about interactions. Like along the pool, like there's a lot of things you can say to an athlete and you can provide meaning to a practice. In terms of swimming laps, sure, we have to swim laps today, but it could be more challenging. You can create an environment where it's meaningful. For a 10-year-old or 15-year-old or.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another little topic that I've read about in some of your work, is that sometimes you find that in small towns they tend to develop more elite athletes than big cities. What is the, secret to success of these smaller towns developing more, or maybe not more, but more per capita elite athletes?
Well, we certainly don't have a definitive answer on that one. There's lots of data showing that in North America, in Australia, the US, the US and Canada. But there's countries where you don't see that effect, or so. But I think we have to go beyond the effect and try to understand the factors that we know from the research that makes a difference. And to me, we can hypothesize some factors, and one is, the environment, in terms of the physical environment, the accessibility to field, to go out in a safe environment where, if you're in Sydney or if you're in Toronto, it's a lot harder for kids to go out and kick a soccer ball than if you're in a city of 50,000 in west of Queensland, or is it west of Queensland, or would you be in the ocean, or?
No, west. Yeah, west. You can
Yeah,
be
west of,
anywhere.
yeah, that was. Yes. Yeah, so there's physical environment factor, there's activities factor. We talked about deliberate practice, deliberate play. Maybe in a small town, you have less deliberate practice. You have more opportunity to play for fun with peers, with friends. You have more opportunity to play different position on a team because maybe there's no selection at an earlier age. And then there's the whole social dynamics. Maybe there's role models there. There's players that come back to that town, and that kind of, kids look at them and say, oh, I can be like this person. They're not, but you don't see that in bigger city. Or the coaches maybe are more, they relate better to athletes. It's less business oriented. There's certainly less early specialization. If you think about ice hockey in Canada, they don't keep ice in smaller towns during the summer. So the kids, they cannot play ice hockey all year round. They have to play soccer in the summer. So those are the factors, and they're just things. I guess in a small city that would, maybe it happens more naturally. It doesn't mean that in a bigger city you can still not develop talent and get kids, but we need to think about it a little bit harder. In bigger cities, maybe in a smaller city, it's more natural. That type of environment. There's a pretty good documentary that just came out Denmark. It's called "The Hockey Miracle in the Middle of Nowhere."
Okay.
And it's a small town in Denmark that produce 5 hockey players in the NHL and at a professional level. And Denmark is not very well known for developing ice hockey players. But the story, it's about 45 minutes, but it takes a lot of the birthplace data and talks about it and explain it, and the stories around those 5 players and how they grew up in that town and how that town became such an important part of Denmark and of hockey. And they all came from the same city. They all played in the NHL and they all came from the same place.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll definitely try and watch that. Do you know if that's on any streaming services?
Apple TV.
Apple TV. Okay.
Yeah, and also on Vimeo.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to get my hands on it. No, thanks for that.
It's good.
We've got it, and I'm not sure if you've heard of the town or not. We've got a town here called Wagga Wagga. Very strange sounding name of a town, but it's probably in a similar position in terms of, I won't speculate the size of the city, but it's rural. And I think in terms of rugby league players, it's, many professional rugby league players, Australian cricket players, AFL players. So this small town keeps providing a lot of these elite athletes. So it's and I think they're quite proud of that as well, the people from Wagga Wagga. So
interesting. Wagga Wagga.
Yeah. So I'm going to start to wrap up now, and I thought I'd leave these questions till last, and it might sort of cover what you've spoken about throughout the rest of the podcast. And it goes back to the model that you developed called the developmental model of sport participation. What does this model suggest for young athletes?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of summarized a lot of the things we've talked about, and basically what we suggested in there's a lot of different models that exist to help organization to come up with athlete development pathways. Sometimes the issues with those models is that they're constructed, and then there's research that is used to support some of the things that they do. The developmental model of sport participation came from research. Like, we did the research and then we build the model based on the findings of the research. And I think that's a big difference. And basically what we suggest in there is that there should be a period of sampling. So that's all. There should be, like, from entry into sport at 5, 6, 7 years old to about 12 or 13 years old. And a period of sampling means that kids should then be involved in different sport, and kids should be involved in play and practice. So diversification between sport and diversification within sport. After that period, at around 12, and again, it could vary a lot, different depending on. But after you sample, then you can specialize and invest if you really want to become an elite level athlete. But there's also a pathway that allows you to do more recreational sport. And there should be like if you want to play tennis for fun, then or basketball, there's leagues, there's places where you can do that. And I think what we've been able to show is that this type of involvement at a very young age lead to performance, elite level performance. You can still develop your elite level athletes. It leads to long-term engagement. So the one that don't reach a high level of performance, they still play sport for fun. And it leads to personal development. So that's the 3 Ps: performance, participation, personal development. And so basically you have this kind of so that's the DMSP. And then on the side of this, you have an early specialization pathway, which could lead to high level of performance, but decrease participation, engagement over time, and decrease enjoyment and less personal development, and more dropout, more injuries. So the early specialization pathway is you get engaged in one sport, you do a lot of deliberate practice and less deliberate play. And that type of involvement, again, there's research that would show that, yes, it does lead to elite performance, but there's a high cost associated with that for the people that don't achieve elite performance.
Yeah, there's that high risk of burnout or dropout in that.
Exactly.
I guess in that model. Now, one of the other things, and I think you mentioned it right near the start as well, and you just mentioned it then, was like personal development. So what are some of the aspects of sports participation that help, I guess, personal development or help being a good person?
Yeah, 2 things. So challenge and enjoyment. And these studies come from developmental psychology. They had kids just rate different activities of their life. And basically when kids are in school, it's high on challenge, low on enjoyment. When kids are watching TV, it's high on enjoyment, but low on challenge. When kids are playing sport, it's high on challenge, high on enjoyment. And then they look at outcomes. Activities that are high on challenge and high on enjoyment lead to better outcomes in terms of those self-esteem and those kind of personal outcomes. Self-esteem, initiative, leadership, discipline, responsibility. So these things that really make human being better citizen, better, as a contributing to society, they come from development in those activities that are challenging and enjoyable. So it's not only sport, it's also music and arts. So all those kinds of extracurricular activities where kids don't have to be involved, they're voluntary, but they want to be in there, and it's enjoyable and it's challenging. So sport has that, but what do we do with youth sport very often is we take the fun out of it. So we take the enjoyment out, and now suddenly it becomes school. It becomes one of those things again that does not allow the development of those assets.
Yeah. Awesome. No, that's really interesting, and I really appreciate your time today. You've given us a lot of insight into, first of all, your research and different areas of developmental sport that coaches can use. And I guess that's part of the reason I've started this podcast, is to create opportunities for coaches to hear from people like yourselves and other coaches and other academics, and potentially, I guess, transfer some of this research into practice. So I really appreciate your time. And I know that it's the afternoon. What is it, about 4 o'clock, I think, over there?
4 o'clock,
4 o'clock.
Yeah.
So again, I've eaten into your afternoon, so I apologize, and I really appreciate that. And Professor Jean Côté, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It's hard to pinpoint some of the key takeaways for me in this episode. I got so much out of it. But I guess if I had to list 3 things, I would have to say that Jean's discussion about transformational coaching really highlighted what some other guests have also said in terms of coaching the person first. The amount of research Jean and his colleagues have performed in this area definitely supports this idea, and for a coach at any level, I think it's such an important part of your coaching to develop. As a believer of a games-based learning approach, I really like the way Jean compared deliberate practice with deliberate play, and how deliberate play can be so rewarding and effective for young athletes. We as coaches tend to overcoach and overdrill through deliberate practice. As Sean said, we need to remember kids' sport is for kids. Don't try coaching them like adults. And finally, the ideas Jean discussed around sampling and diversification in sport, not just sampling a variety of sports, but also having diversity of experiences within one sport, can be so important for developing athlete skills. I really enjoyed chatting with Professor Côté, as I've read and cited so much of his work in my own research. So in the academic world, it's sort of like spending an hour with Cristiano Ronaldo in the football world. He's an absolute superstar of the game. If you'd like to follow Jean, he's active on Twitter under the handle @JeanCôté46. I'll leave a link to this in the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast, please like it and promote it within your coaching or athlete community by sharing it on your social media pages, and feel free to follow me for more information around coaching and sports science on Instagram @TheCoachDR, and I'll catch you next time on the Coach Doctor podcast.